everybody, this is Philip. I'm going to take you guys through my presentation, The Evolution of Title IX. Those of you that aren't familiar with Title IX, Title IX is a portion of the U.S. Education Amendments of 1972. It more or less states that there can be no exclusion or discrimination based on one's gender in any education program or activity that receives federal financial assistance. And over time that this law has been interpreted a little bit differently. So I'm going to take you step by step through what I found out. The first thing is what I learned. Some of the different things that I did find out as I was doing the research is that there have been a number of different court cases that have expanded or gone further with what Title IX actually is. I'll get into more of those in the next slide. The next thing that I learned was that Title IX has been interpreted completely differently from one administration to the next, so it could likely change again in 2016 with the new administration in office. So it'll be interesting to see if Title IX changes again from that point, or if it changes even within this presidency, as changes might occur socially where what is acceptable and what is not in terms of different types of harassment. What I knew going into this was that Title IX has been interpreted differently over the course of its life. It started out simply as providing equitable access to education, no matter what your gender was, but then it transformed to being expanded beyond just education to actual sports, and then later on it was added in terms of like sexual harassment and how it was applied there. It could be going in a direction that it could be expanded to LGBT harassment. There are different people arguing that it could technically apply to those particular individuals. So it'll be interesting to see if Title IX does go that direction. The other thing, obviously, like I said, is that it involves sports being equitable, there being a male and female equivalent sport, and you know, the spending being more or less equitable. The next thing is the different court cases that were discovered, or that I discovered. The first one being Grove City versus Bell. In this particular case, it stated that Title IX only applies to institutions which receive federal financial aid through their financial aid department. This changes based on the fact that this was the Supreme Court's interpretation of Title IX. Congress itself did not like this interpretation, so they had to go back and pass a new law, which they passed the Civil Rights Restoration Act, that said instead of it just being the financial aid department, it actually applies to everything on campus. And this is where it sort of opens up sports to be, you know, one of the things that it has to be equitable in. The next case is Franklin versus Gwinnett County Public Schools. In this case, it says that an individual can sue a public school system or a higher education institution, a college or university, for monetary damages if it is found that they did not adhere to Title IX. There's a lot of discrepancy from that point, and then we start seeing it opened up to what it means to actually not enforce Title IX. And one of the things that's pointed out in the next case, Lisa Simpson et al. Versus University of Colorado, is that there has to be a deliberate indifference by the institution in order for it to be liable under Title IX. In this case, Lisa Simpson versus the University of Colorado, you had the school knowingly sort of ignore the problems with the football program on campus. They knew about a lot of sexual assault and rape that was taking place on campus involving the athletics department, and they did nothing. There were several instances where the local law enforcement actually told them what was going on and how they needed to fix it, but the university did nothing. Because of this, they were liable under Title IX because they showed deliberate indifference to enforcing Title IX. And this is where sexual harassment and assault began being applied to Title IX. The next case is Williams versus Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia. In this case, the deliberate indifference part had already been established. So in this case, Ms. Williams had to actually show the deliberate indifference of the University of Georgia. In this case, she showed it by saying that the student that they had recruited heavily for basketball, Tony Cole, had a history of sexual violence in his past, and because the university did nothing to prevent these actions from taking place on campus, they were liable So they knew of the history. He'd been kicked out of a school previously, and they still admitted him on campus, but they didn't do anything to prevent him from taking the same actions that he did on previous campuses before. The next thing I'll talk about is my research process, how things have gone so far. One of the things I can say is that I'm probably going to narrow my research, but I don't have to. I'm choosing to just because I actually found a lot more information on a topic that had interested me to begin with, but I thought it'd be too narrow to actually do the research on. So it's interesting I was actually able to find enough information on what it was that I was trying to do in the first place. So I'm probably going to narrow my research down to more or less sexual assault and how it applies to Title IX, and how it could be expanded upon even in that facet with the LGBT populations on campuses. So like I said, searching Title IX itself yielded a large number of resources from which to pull from and read. So the research process has been pretty good for the most part. I've had tons of scholarly research that I was able to find because of the different education and law journals that are available on this particular topic, just because with it being interpreted so much differently from one administration to the next, it offers a lot of people's different opinions on the what has happened to Title IX as well as what could happen to Title IX in the future. So what I have as far as my remaining questions is, well, have I exhausted or done enough research for the assignment? Is there more out there? Have I done enough? Okay. The other issue I've had is just that some of the readings can be a little tedious because of the language that's involved. They are law journals, so sometimes I'm not quite familiar with some of the jargon that's within some of these. In terms of things that have come up in terms of my own thought process as I'm doing the research is why haven't public education systems done more to inform their faculty about Title IX and how it applies to them directly, so that way they can make sure that they're compliant with Title IX. The other thing that got brought up as I was doing this is remembering a particular story from App State where there were some issues with sexual assault on campus involving our own football team, and how the university sort of handled it very poorly, and there was a particular professor on campus that actually criticized the campus handling of the case, and so it also involved sort of academic freedom. It was really interesting. I just sort of read more or less an opinion piece on it just to kind of get some information on what actually happened, but I thought that was kind of interesting, and so I was wondering, what is Appalachian State going to do in the future to prevent this from happening again, as far as violating Title IX? So it's very interesting. The next thing is, what am I going to do next? Well, I'm going to continue reading sources, figure out which ones I'm actually going to end up creating that final project from. I also plan to schedule a wrap session with the App State Library just to make sure that I've done plenty of research, that I found as much information as I possibly can to do a good job with this, and then of course look at the rubric to make sure that I'm staying on target with what I'm supposed to do for the assignment. Here are the list of potential works that I'm really looking at for this. I still have to narrow it down obviously to 3, but so far these ones have really stood out to me. Campus Sexual Misconduct, Restorative Justice Approaches to Enhance Compliance with Title IX Guidance. This one specifically talks about a new way of sort of solving the problem itself. It's not quite like mediation, because the one side has to agree that there was fault on their part in order to actually do this. Otherwise, you go through your typical steps of a Title IX, sexual harassment sort of violation or assault violation. So I thought that was interesting, something that campuses could potentially look at doing. It sort of depends from one situation to the next. The next thing I have is Education Policies for Gender Equity, Probing into State Responses. This particular one is actually more or less sort of a report on what the government's done over the course of Title IX, what involvement they've had in changing what Title IX is, as well as how good they have been at in terms of enforcing Title IX across the U.S. The third work I have is Prompt and Equitable Explained, How to Craft a Title IX Compliant Sexual Harassment Policy and Why It Matters. This one literally just talks about where the Dear Colleague letters come into play, and why it is important. We talked about those cases where the universities or colleges are being sued for not complying. Obviously, the big reason why is money. No campus wants to lose money just to litigation. So it's pretty important that they hold on to the money that they have so they can apply it to worthwhile endeavors. The next one is protecting the kids in the hall using Title IX to stop student-on-student anti-gay harassment. This is, as I was referring to, in terms of the LGBT population being applied to Title IX. Do they fall within the same harassment and assault as females? So it could be a way that it starts being applied in the future with Title IX. The last one is Title IX in the Dear Colleague letter, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Again, this is explaining what the Dear Colleague letter is for, how it applies to Title IX, how, preventing these things can be the best thing for a campus because it can provide a worthwhile environment for students to take part in without fear of sexual assault. So that opens it up to you guys. What questions do you have about this so far? What concerns do you have? Anything, let me know. I'll respond back to you guys, and thank you guys for the time, and good luck with your papers in the other class as well as these papers. Have a good day.